thank you again for making the wise decision to spend some time in meditation this afternoon. It's curious, we spend perhaps 30 minutes in meditation, in sitting. It can feel like a long time, and it can feel like a short time. Right? But there is a timeless component to meditation practice, to stillness practice. If we really can sit all of the way down, just align with the way things are, be open and allowing of what appears in the mind, then it's not really a matter of time. There's a timeless component then. If we can really let go of preferential thinking during meditation, then again that timelessness opens up. Usually for us as human beings, we have a preferential relationship to the content. Right? So, for instance, we may hear a sound that we dislike, or we may hear a sound that we do like. We may be feeling a certain way emotionally, or however that we're doing. There might be a preference around that. And then the content of our mind, the thinking mind, that usually is preeminent. Like that seems extra important often as human beings. Well, how we're thinking about what's going on. That can also seem to have greater importance. But really, you really drill down, the art of meditation in whatever lineage that it's approached is really a matter of setting aside our preferences and allowing things as they are, both internally and externally, to be as they are without the value system attached. So you hear the sound of the motorcycle. Like when we were sitting there, the sound, I think it was a motorcycle kind of racing by. We usually get like a helicopter or a plane or a motorcycle, or maybe a dog barking. For the most part, it's very, very quiet in this space. Just a couple of reminders of an external world, but nothing too upsetting. A few things like this, you know. But you can see immediately when you hear a sound, then often the mind will label that, will interpret it a certain way, and left unchecked, that can then become the subject of our meditation. Same thing, the thinking mind. A thought can arise in the mind, and left unchecked, you know, if we're swallowed up by that thought, then we add another thought and another comment. And pretty soon we're just spinning a web and a commentary about reality, about our life, while life as it is becomes then obscured as we put something in between us and the experience. A lot of the discipline of a practice of meditation is over and over again coming back to direct experience of what is. Now, the breath awareness is a beautiful gateway to that practice. It is just what is. There is the breathing in and breathing out. It's undoubtedly real and taking place, and so it's a good anchor, especially if we're feeling particularly busy in the mind, to just come back to that breath awareness. And it's an inexhaustible practice. It's not something that's mastered and then forgotten. You know, as I brought up before, the Buddha, who represented here on the altar behind me, after 30 or 40 years after his enlightenment experience, was asked by his attendant Ananda what he did when he sat meditation. And he said, I sit with awareness of breath, sit with awareness of breathing. So inexhaustible practice. But today I wanted to bring up something a little, casting a wider net with the tradition, and actually looking at the Tao Te Ching for some lines here. I really like this translation that I use, which is by Stephen Mitchell. There's many different translations of the Tao Te Ching. It's been kicking around for a couple of thousand years now, so a lot of people had a run at it. And this is a pretty modern translation, and Stephen Mitchell has had a lot of Zen experience, so it's relatable to me. And he's also a practitioner, and his wife, Byron Katie, who you may have heard, is also a spiritual teacher. So good translation. And the Tao Te Ching and this way of looking at life was, of course, the foundation in China already before Buddhism came into China. So Buddhism coming from India into China became very much affected and incorporated with the Taoist and Confucian spirituality and religions that had already been in place for a long time. And that is where Zen actually emerges from. It's called Chan in China in that 4th, 5th, 6th century AD. And then Chan would become Zen in Japan. And that's the lineage in which I've studied. So looking back some 2,500 years, which I always think is remarkable if we can pick up a text and be like, wow, this was like written a couple of thousand years ago, it's probably pretty good if they bothered maintaining it for a couple of, there's something there. And this is the number chapter 67 here, which says, okay, some say that this is Lao Tzu talking, some say that my teaching is nonsense. Others call it lofty but impractical. But to those who have looked inside themselves, this nonsense makes perfect sense. And to those who put it into practice, this loftiness has roots that go deep. I have just 3 things to teach: simplicity, patience, and compassion. These 3 are your greatest treasures. Simple in actions and in thoughts, you return to the source of being. Patient with both friends and enemies, you accord with the way things are. Compassionate toward yourself, you reconcile all beings in the world. Right, so, although not specifically a Buddhist text or specifically a Zen text, it still completely aligns with Zen understanding here. Just 3 things to teach. I like teachings that come in 3s, like maximum 3. If it's 8, I'll forget 1 or 2 of them. That's how I'm simple in mind, obviously. 3 though, it's just okay, that's a nice system. 3, that comes up in many of the world religions and spirituality, right? It's not dualistic. It's something more, but it's also simple. So just 3 things to teach: simplicity, patience, and compassion. These are your greatest treasures. Simple in action and in thought, you return to the source of being. Meditation is that. It's returning to the source of being. Quite literally. We're all being. We're all beings, having the experience of being awake and alive in the world, which is an extraordinary thing. It may seem very quite ordinary or mundane at times, or even burdensome at times. Right? Human life, after all, is full of challenge and difficulty, as well as joy and love. We have the whole gamut of human experience. But all of us here are undoubtedly here, having this experience. And everybody who's joining us in Zoom too. And we can look, I brought up like this text is a couple of thousand years old. So those who, like Lao Tzu, is credited with writing this, and all of the teachers and all the sages and all of the people remembered and not remembered for a couple of thousand years, they're not here. Right? They are here in one sense. Right? But in their physical form, they're not here. We're the ones who are currently carrying the torch for being. You know, we're having this experience now. And returning to to return to the source of being. You know, the instructions for meditation are quite absurdly simple. Sit down, find a reasonably comfortable posture. We can learn that in one class, or we read a book, we take one course, we're sort of done with the whole thing. This is what we do. We sit down, someone's going to hit a bell, and then it's up to you. It's up to you how you fill that space for those 30 minutes. It may appear from here, it's like I look out and I had to move at one point when both my legs fell asleep. I thought, I'm just going to adjust things, and I look up and everyone else is sitting perfectly still. It always feels that way if you're the one who has to move, right? You just look like there's 30 Buddhas in the room and this chump, right? That's how it... But you look up and everybody is sitting beautifully. Everyone on Zoom is sitting beautifully, or you know, the internet dropped. Could be either one. And yet, inside them, internally, there's like 30, 40 uniquely different experiences going on, which are not seen in the room. It's like what happens between the ears. We may appear on the outside to be sitting beautifully still, and it's like, wow, look at that person, they're very present. And yet on the inside, it could be a very different picture. All kinds of churn and things going on. And if we're a beginner with the meditation practice, we see like very quickly how difficult it is to actually take that simple instruction and bring it into realization. Sit still, let go of preferences, put thought to one side, and just experience directly what is. Well, that sounds great, but the actual application of that is very difficult for us as human beings. Because as human beings, we'd rather be doing something. And that's how we function during our waking hours. In fact, that's how we function in our sleeping hours a lot of the right? Like there's not many, do you ever dream that you're just sitting under a tree for an hour like the Buddha? No. It's usually like for me, I'm running down a hall somewhere trying, or whatever it is, right? But there's always this, as a human being, there's always some doing going on. But meditation is non-doing. It's letting go of doing, of pursuing after something, pursuing after the objects of mind. But it's stopping. Rather, it's stopping. You stop and just allow life internally, that internal world, and then externally, the motorcycle, the dog, everything, let go of the difference there. Let go of the experience that says, this is me internally experiencing the external world, which is the human navigation system that we're wired with. But that can be dropped off. You can just let that external felt world and the internal felt world, let an imagined barrier between those worlds, let that dissolve. Just sit, internal, external, be unperturbed, allowing things to be as they are. Simple in action and in meditation, it's certainly simple in action. Just create the posture, sit, breathe, simple in action, and in thought. Don't construct ideas and notions around what it is that we're doing in meditation or in sitting. Just be simple in action and thought. Then you return to the source of being. That source of being, which is all things, all around. You can't find anything to grasp onto in that source of being. But rather you are aligned with the profound mystery of being, of life. If we're always personalizing that experience, well, my experience of the source of being is colored by this or disturbed by that. That's the work of meditation and a Dharma practice, is learning to set aside that me identity, which is always finding fault, always creating difference. Returning to the source of being is inviting non-difference, and a return to wholeness, a return to things just as they are. The mind, the me self doesn't really want that experience. and yet, to return to a place of open, allowing that non-difference, the mind, the body, the source of being recognizes and appreciates that realization. That's why the Buddha has a smile on his lips. That's aligning with the source of being, where you can put down the troubles, the concerns, the conditioned response, the likes and the dislikes that a human being always carries around. And even for 30 minutes, just let those go, don't perpetuate those, and return to the source of being. That is simplicity. I read a comment on simplicity by, was it Franz Porsche? It was the person who designed the Porsche. The car, the famous sports car. He said he couldn't find a sports car he liked, so he decided he's going to build one that he liked. Right? And he had a quote, and I'm gonna butcher this quote, but he basically says, some things should not. There's no need to add extra decoration, but rather a great product should just be the basic, simple form. Right? It's like there's no need to add anything extra. If something is just fulfilling its form, then it's beautiful. It's simple and it's beautiful. No need to add anything fancy on top. So, simplicity. It's an interesting word to drill into. So then Lao Tzu says, patient with both friends and enemies, you accord with the way things are. Enemies is a strong word, In another place in the Tao Te Ching, enemies is typically translated as opponent. Like even in battles, there's no enemy, but rather there's an opponent, and let the best one win. So it's usually, enemy feels very other, very, very different. Opponent is more, you use that word, that's more of a sense of, okay, there's going to be an altercation here with an opponent. It's like a game of chess or something, or tennis, right? You have an opponent, or your enemy, but you want to beat them. And that's a human experience too. Right? We have our friends, we have family, we have those who are close, and then there are those who feel a little further away, and some of them can appear as opponents or as enemies. Driving here is always great. We were talking to Keith about that on the way down. It's just like somehow it creeps in the Dharma talk every time, because it's like, if you want to study the human experience, drive around drive the 405 or whatever else, because some people are friendly, some not many, and then there's opponents. As you try to make some lane changes. But if you're patient with both friends and enemies, you accord with the way things are. That's interesting. Right? It's like in our life, in our human life, there's always challenge with people. In fact, I'd say like most of the challenge of life is other people. Right? And we are gregarious and kind of social creatures by nature, so here we are hanging out, we're hanging out in a group. Most of us, I think, of those here and online, we're in touch with other people. And yet a lot of the difficulty and frustration of being a human being is revealed with our interactions with other people. Unless that's just me, right? No, I just like, do folks agree? Yeah.
I think my biggest opponent is myself.
Your biggest opponent is yourself, yeah.
A version of myself that is not the best version of myself.
Right. Well, when we talk about self and other, and that's a typical human experience. We experience the world dualistically, self and other things seem to be separated. And so that is a cause of division, quite literally, and difficulty comes from that. But when you say your own, the difficulty is with yourself, if you look into yourself and attach a name and a history and an identity to that one, then that's another way of creating other. Only that one is tougher to see. But it's the same process, really. Like I like with studying with people or practicing with people, a lot of people are very capable of just bringing in a lot of forgiveness and reconciliation and alignment with other people, but they have most difficulty with themselves. That's a very human experience. So I'd agree. But we say here, patient then. Be patient with both friends and enemies, whether internal or external. Then you accord with the way things are. So there's no end to it in the human realm of having friends and opponents, whether it's with ourselves or with others on the outside. It's like that, it always reminds me of that quote, I think it was from Eckhart Tolle, who said, if you want to check in with how enlightened you are, go home for Christmas. Because that's where the triggers are, right? And those who are closest to us. If you're patient with friends and opponents, you accord with the way things are. An aspect of that is seeing that there's no end to it. In the human condition, there's always difficulty, and there's always difficulty. Not always. I mean, we tend to focus on the difficulty because we're trying to improve here, right? But there's no end to it in the human experience. There's always going to be some give and take there. But if you can really swallow that down and allow it, and to see that that's the way that it is, and your peace and serenity of mind is not predicated on a result, that life has to change in order to suit you, then you can declare a unilateral peace now. And don't wait for the other side to come to terms, because the other side will never come to terms. Life will always provide, that difficulty. But you can declare, again, that's an aspect of meditation. Every time that you sit and the bell is struck, just declare a unilateral peace treaty with life as it is. With the way things are, with all people and all things, and this own aspect of self. We don't wait for it to look like something or for some shift to happen. Sometimes in meditation we're trying to force a shift or try to get to something deeper or something that looks better or feels differently. But the direct way is to give up those ideas and openly accept and embrace this as it is now, always. Then there's nothing more to do. The world is as it is, and you've declared peace with it. But we're tested with that every day. That's more of the principle. But there's also with principle, there's practice. There's practice. And every day we practice. I practice, there's things again, with the drive down here, there's things that happen. You're like, you point things out which are like wrong or triggering or difficult. But it's like, do you stay there? Or like, how do you use those opportunities? But the heart of meditation is to see that there is all of these ups and downs that we experience are taking place within a landscape that is unperturbed and unmoved by the ups and downs. That's the source of being that we come into contact with in meditation. It can become more apparent. That's why we sit and be still, because then it's peace is most obvious. But that basic peace, that fundamental peace of mind, is never absent, even in the midst of a cacophony and noise, or like an argument or something else that is going on. And with practice, with the discipline of meditation and inquiry, that becomes ever more real. And you can rely on that. That way, when, a lot of the nuts and bolts I find with present awareness practice or with meditation is, you're living your everyday life, something's going on, something happens, but instead of just going to the reactive place, unexamined and going off automatically with a reaction, something occurs and you have the space to see it and to make a decision over how to respond. That difference between reactivity, which is unconscious, and response, which is choice. You can decide then whether lean on the horn or not. I err on the side of not, because you don't know who it is. Yeah, exactly. I'm very polite driving around LA. And then this final one, compassionate toward yourself. You reconcile all beings in the world. In Buddhism, we talk a lot about wisdom and compassion, two main aspects in Buddhism. And often with the teachings, with talks, with the teachings and the practice, there's a lot of focus on the wisdom aspect. And it's something we're looking at this year in bringing in more focus in some of the classes and approaches to raise up the compassion aspect a little more. Because when you look out there in the world, we could probably do with dialing up the compassion a little bit, right? And it's not that wisdom and compassion are separated. Ultimately, these are two stems that emerge from the same root too. Again, this all comes from the same root. But with our practice of compassion toward yourself, you reconcile all beings in the world. But this self part, we shouldn't skip over. Compassionate toward yourself. Like, what is the self, ultimately? Not so easy to say or to define. With Dharma practice, the self usually begins with an idea of self. I've got an idea of me. My story, my history, my likes, my dislike. It's kind of nebulous and I can't really pin it down, but I've been living with this one I know him pretty well at this point. But it's that sense of me, self, as that self. You can be compassionate toward that one. But the experiential truth of meditation is to look into the self. And to see that this self, which may just have felt like ends at the fingertips of the toes, but really when you look into it, the self is so much broader. The self is vast and is so much larger. You see, like, wow, this idea of self that I am, what is the self? Well, and then you can list it out. Well, I'm a son, I'm a father, or as a mother, I'm a sister, I'm a boss, I'm the intern. It could be all of these different. We live only in relationship to other people and other things. To be compassionate toward the self is to be compassionate with the whole, with the entirety, ultimately. Again, inside and out. But most of us will come up against an edge there pretty soon. When you expand that self out to include the whole world. Many people say, yeah, I can do that, but not this guy. Or this, right? It's hard. We push you up against those edges. But ultimately, to be fully compassionate is to reconcile all beings, all things in the world, to reconcile all beings in the world. If you can reconcile with this one, reconcile with this being, then you reconcile all beings. But for most of us as practitioners, there's room to grow there. There's a bit more space to stretch into.